My ex-wife stole my fortune. But my nephew built an empire. Chapter 1. Foundations. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon always brought me back to those Sunday mornings in our small kitchen. Mom, with flour dusting her cheeks, would hum softly while transforming simple ingredients into edible art. Dad would sit at the kitchen table, newspaper spread out, occasionally glancing up with pride. "Chris, come see what your mother's creating," he'd say, beckoning me over. "That right there is magic." My brother Mark would inevitably stumble in late, yawning dramatically. "Are those cinnamon rolls? Save me 3. Mom would laugh, ruffling his hair. "Just like your father, always thinking with your stomach." Our parents were careful to divide their time equally between us. Dad took Mark fishing on Saturdays and me to art museums on Sundays. Mom taught me baking on Wednesday afternoons and helped Mark with his model airplanes on Thursdays. There was balance, harmony, love, everything a family should have. "You boys are different as night and day," Dad would say, "but you're both extraordinary in your own ways." Mom would always add, "And that's exactly as it should be." I never noticed how her eyes would linger on Mark a beat longer than necessary, or how Dad's smile sometimes didn't quite reach his eyes when he said it. Chapter 2. Dreams and Schemes. "It's going to be called Chris Cakes and Creations," I told Mark over beers in my apartment, sketching logo ideas on a napkin. We were both in our 20s then, me fresh out of culinary school, him between jobs, again. "Sounds fancy," Mark said, tipping his bottle toward me. "You really think people will pay premium prices for flour and sugar?" "They're not paying for ingredients," I corrected him. "They're paying for art, for moments, for memories." Mark shrugged. "If you say so. I've got something brewing too, you know. This guy the first met has connections in crypto. Early investment opportunity. Could be huge. I'd heard variations of this before. How much do you need?" "Just $2,000, 3, tops." His eyes had that familiar gleam. "I'll pay you back double in 3 months." I wrote the check, knowing I'd never see that money again. It was the pattern we'd established years ago. Mark needed, I provided. He was my brother. "You're too soft," Dad told me later that week over dinner. "Your brother needs to stand on his own 2 feet. He's family," I said simply. Dad's eyes clouded briefly. "Yes. He is." Chapter 3. Lisa. She walked into my bakery on a rainy Tuesday, ordered a lemon tart, and changed my life. "This," Lisa said, closing her eyes as she took a bite, "is the best thing I've ever tasted." I wiped my hands on my apron, suddenly conscious of the flour in my hair. "Thank you. It's my grandmother's recipe." "She must have been extraordinary," Lisa said, leaning forward slightly. "She was." I smiled, feeling an unexpected connection. "Would you like another?" Her smile was luminous. "I'd like that very much." Our courtship was a whirlwind. Lisa was everything I wasn't: outgoing, adventurous, ambitious. She had plans, dreams that stretched beyond our small town. "We could build something amazing together," she'd say, curled against me late at night. "Your talent, my business sense. We could be unstoppable." When I introduced her to my family, Mom seemed reserved. "She's very determined," she said carefully. "Isn't that good?" I asked. Mom patted my hand. "Just make sure you're both determined about the same things, sweetheart." Mark, on the other hand, was immediately charmed. "You hit the jackpot, bro," he told me, eyes following Lisa as she moved around the room. I didn't notice how Lisa's gaze lingered on him too. Chapter 4. Family Ties. The day Alex was born was the happiest of my life. I held that tiny bundle, tears streaming down my face, overcome with love. "He has your chin," Lisa said, exhausted but glowing. "And your eyes," I whispered, though I couldn't really tell yet. Newborns all looked a bit the same to me. Mark was the first visitor, bringing an extravagant gift, a silver rattle that must have cost a month's rent. Uncle Mark's going to spoil you rotten, he cooed, taking Alex from my arms with surprising confidence. You're good with him, Lisa observed, something unreadable in her expression. Natural talent, Mark winked, and they shared a laugh that felt like a private joke. Dad watched from the doorway, his brow furrowed slightly. Later, as we walked to the parking lot, he placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Being a father changes everything, Chris. Makes you think about what you're leaving behind, what really matters. I know, Dad. No, you don't, not yet. His voice was uncharacteristically solemn. But you will. 2 weeks later, he revised his will. Chapter 5. The Business Grows. Chris Cakes and Creations expanded steadily over the next 5 years. 2 locations became 4, then 6. We had contracts with major hotels, celebrity clients, even a feature in a national magazine. You've built something special, Lisa said, reviewing our quarterly earnings. She'd taken over the financial side completely, freeing me to focus on the creative aspects. We built it, I corrected, kissing her temple. She smiled thinly. Yes, of course. Home life had grown strained. Lisa worked late more often than not. Alex was increasingly in the care of nannies surprisingly, with Mark, who had moved nearby and seemed to have stabilized somewhat. We've bonded, Mark explained when I expressed surprise at their closeness. He's a great kid, Chris. Smart as a whip. Takes after his father, I said proudly. A strange expression crossed Mark's face. Yeah, his father. Mom's health began failing that year. Subtle at first, fatigue, forgetfulness, then more concerning symptoms. Dad was her constant companion at doctor's appointments, his engineer's mind cataloging every detail, researching treatments late into the night. Your mother is the love of my life, he told me during a rare moment alone. There's nothing I wouldn't forgive for her happiness. I thought he was speaking about her illness. I didn't understand the weight of confession in his words. Chapter 6. The Betrayal. The call came on a Thursday morning as I was finalizing designs for a governor's anniversary cake. Chris, it's Jim. My accountant's voice was tight. You need to come to my office. Now. 30 minutes later, my world collapsed. The accounts are empty, Jim said, spreading statements before me. Business, personal, savings, all of it. And there's more. Loans in your name, second mortgages on the properties. My mouth went dry. That's impossible. Lisa would never. It's her signature, Chris. And yours. He passed me a document. Except this isn't your signature, is it? I stared at the familiar yet wrong version of my name. No, it's not. I'm so sorry. Jim's voice softened. There's something else. Large transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. Joint account holders. Lisa and who? I asked, though something in me already knew. Mark Evans. My brother's name hit like a physical blow. I drove home in a daze, hoping against hope for an explanation, an error, anything but the betrayal I feared. When I pulled into the driveway, Mark's car was there. My stomach twisted. I entered silently through the back door, voices drifting from the living room. He'll never understand, Lisa was saying. He's too straight-laced, too trusting. We don't have a choice now, Mark replied. Everything's in motion. The money's moved. What about Alex? A pause. He comes with us, obviously. He's my son. The world tilted. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself, a small sound escaping my throat. They both turned, faces draining of color. Chris, Lisa stood, hands outstretched. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because it looks like you've been sleeping with my brother, stealing my money, and lying about being the father of my son. Please, tell me what it actually is. Mark stepped forward. Bro, listen. Don't. My voice was ice. Don't call me that. Don't speak to me. Get out of my house. You don't understand, Lisa pleaded. We needed the money. The opportunities in Belize. Belize, I echoed. You were going to take my son to Belize. Our son, Mark said quietly. Something snapped inside me. I lunged at him, years of betrayal erupting in a single, desperate moment. We crashed into the coffee table, glass shattering. Lisa screamed, Alex cried from upstairs, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 7. Aftermath. The days following the confrontation passed in a blur. Lisa disappeared with Alex. Mark vanished too, but not before a final, alcohol-fueled phone call. Come on, Chris, don't be like that, he slurred. We needed the money. Lisa had a plan. A plan to steal my life savings. To lie to me for years. My knuckles were white around the phone. It's not like that. We were gonna pay you back, eventually. Was Alex ever going to call me, Dad, again? Were you ever going to tell me the truth? Silence, then a soft, I don't know. How long? I demanded. How long were you sleeping with my wife? He hesitated. Since before the wedding. I hung up, a guttural sound tearing from my throat. I called Mom that night, desperate for any anchor in the storm. Dad answered, his voice grave. Your mother's in the hospital, son. Come quickly. Chapter 8. Revelations. Mom didn't make it through the night. Heart attack, the doctors said. But I knew better. It was heartbreak, the weight of secrets finally becoming too heavy to bear. The funeral was small, subdued. Mark didn't show. Lisa sent flowers, a gesture so inadequate it bordered on insult. I stood beside Dad, both of us hollow-eyed and diminished. At the wake, Mr. Henderson, Dad's oldest friend and fishing buddy, approached me with a tumbler of whiskey. Walk with me, Chris, he said, leading me to the garden. Your father asked me to speak with you. There are things you need to know. We sat on a stone bench beneath Mom's favorite magnolia tree. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Henderson began. Talented, vivacious, complicated. I know all this, I said impatiently. He shook his head. No, you don't. Chris, there's something you need to know. About your mom and Mark. What is it, Mr. Henderson? Mark. He's not your full brother. Your mom. She had a fling. Years ago. She never told anyone. She wanted to protect you both. The world stopped. What? It was before you were born. Your parents were going through a rough patch. Your father was away on a long project overseas. Your mother was lonely, vulnerable. There was a man, an artist passing through town for a summer exhibit. Pieces clicked into place. Mark's artistic talents so like Mom's, his different temperament, the way Dad sometimes looked at him with a mixture of love and something else I couldn't identify. Resignation, perhaps, acceptance. Dad knew. Henderson nodded slowly. He figured it out when Mark was born. The timing, certain features. But he loved your mother desperately. He chose to forgive, to raise Mark as his own. Does Mark know? Your father doesn't think so. Your mother wanted to protect you both from the truth. I laughed bitterly. Fat lot of good that did. Your father wanted you to know now because. Well, because of. Your father wanted you to know now because. Well, because of the will, and because he thought it might help you understand some things. Understand what? That betrayal runs in my family. Henderson placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. That people are complicated, son. That love and forgiveness can coexist with hurt. Your father chose to love Mark despite everything. That was his strength. I thought of Alex, my nephew, not my son, and felt a complicated ache. I don't know if I have that kind of strength. You'd be surprised what you're capable of, Chris. You're more like your father than you know. Chapter 9. The Will. A week after the funeral, the lawyer called. Dad wanted to meet with me privately about the will. The law office was all mahogany and leather, smelling of lemon polish and old books. Dad sat straight back beside his attorney, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Christopher," he began formally. "I've made some adjustments to my arrangements." The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, passed me a document. "Your father established a separate trust for you years ago, following your business investment. It's been protected from any claims by other family members." I looked up, confused. "But the money's gone." Dad shook his head. "Not all of it. I anticipated complications. This trust, it's substantial. Enough to rebuild." "You knew?" I asked, voice breaking. "About Lisa and Mark." "I suspected something," he admitted. "I've seen that look before, son. The one Mark had when he looked at Lisa. It was the same way that artist looked at your mother all those years ago." The lawyer discreetly excused himself, leaving us alone. "Why didn't you warn me?" I demanded. Dad's eyes were tired but clear. "Would you have believed me? Or would it have driven a wedge between us?" He was right. I wouldn't have listened. "I've spent my life making contingency plans," Dad continued. "It's what engineers do. We anticipate failure points and build in redundancies. This trust is your redundancy, son." "What about Mark and Alex?" "There are provisions for Alex's education. As for Mark," Dad's voice hardened slightly, "he's made his choices. I studied the man before me, this quiet, methodical father who had loved two sons equally despite knowing one wasn't his by blood. Who had forgiven his wife's infidelity and built a life of genuine happiness with her. Who had anticipated his son's struggles and planned for them decades in advance." "How did you do it?" I asked. "Forgive Mom. Raise Mark as your own." "Because I loved her," he said simply. "And because none of us are just one thing, Chris. We're not just our worst mistakes or our best intentions. We're all of it, tangled together." He leaned forward. "Mark is still your brother. Alex is still that little boy you loved from the moment you saw him. Nothing changes that." Something shifted in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first opening of a door that might someday lead there. Chapter 10. Justice and Consequences. The authorities caught up with Lisa in Jamaica 6 months later. Mark had disappeared by then, leaving her holding the bag. She'd tried to pull a similar con on a resort developer, but he'd been more cautious than I had. I sat across from her in the visitor's room, separated by plexiglass, studying the woman I'd once built my life around. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes exchanged for a prison jumpsuit, her perfect makeup absent. "I didn't expect you to come," she said. I needed to understand. She shrugged, a ghost of her old confidence. "What's to understand? I saw an opportunity and I took it." "Was any of it real? Us, our life together?" Something flickered in her eyes, regret, perhaps. "Parts of it, in the beginning." And Alex, were you ever going to tell me?" "Mark wanted to." She looked away. "I thought it would complicate things." I almost laughed at the understatement. "Where is he now, Mark?" "I don't know. He took his cut and disappeared when things got hot." Left me holding the bag. Bitterness tinged her words. "Like father, like son," I murmured. "What?" "Nothing." I stood, suddenly exhausted by her presence. "Goodbye, Lisa." "Chris," she called as I turned to leave. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't look back, not as sorry as I am. Mark's downward spiral was spectacular in its totality. Reports trickled in from mutual acquaintances, gambling debts, drunk and disorderly charges, a stint in rehab that didn't take. He'd blown through his share of the money in record time. I didn't seek him out. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But I did think about Alex. My nephew. The boy I'd loved as my son. Chapter 11. Alex's Return. The knock came on a rainy evening 7 years later. I'd rebuilt my life. A smaller but successful bakery, a modest home, even a few cautious dating attempts that never quite took root. I opened the door to find a teenager with familiar eyes. "Uncle Chris," he said hesitantly. "It's me, Alex." He was taller, leaner, his features sharpening toward manhood, but I'd have known him anywhere. "Alex," I breathed, frozen in place. Can I come in? It's kind of pouring." I stepped aside wordlessly, mind racing. He stood awkwardly in my living room, dripping on the hardwood. "Mom's back in jail," he said flatly. "Dad, Mark, he's not capable of taking care of himself, let alone me. Grandpa's trust fund for my education kicked in when I turned 16. The trustees helped me find you." "Sit down," I managed. "Are you hungry?" A small smile, so like the one I remembered. "Always." Over pasta and garlic bread, Alex told me his story. The years in Belize until the money ran out. Moving to Mexico with Mark until his drinking became too much. Foster care in Arizona after Mark's third DUI. "I always knew about you," he said. "Mom kept newspaper clippings about your bakery. Said you were the most talented man she'd ever known, but too honest for your own good." I snorted. High praise from a con artist. "She wasn't all bad," Alex said quietly. "Just broken somehow, always wanting more than she had." He stayed the night, then another. Weeks turned to months. I enrolled him in the local high school, helped him apply for college. He had his grandfather's mind, methodical, brilliant with numbers and systems. "I want to study engineering," he told me one night. "Like Grandpa." "He'd be proud," I said, throat tight. "Would he?" Alex asked hesitantly. "Even though I'm not, not really family." I thought of Dad, raising Mark with love despite everything. "Your family, Alex. Blood's just one way people become family. Sometimes it's choice that matters more." Chapter 12. Empire from Ashes. Alex thrived in college, double majoring in engineering and business. Summers, he worked at my bakery, displaying a surprising talent for both baking and business operations. "It's in the genes," I joked once, then winced at the inadvertent reference. "Good thing genes aren't destiny," he replied easily. "Otherwise I'd be in jail or rehab." On his 21st birthday, he gained access to the principal of his trust fund. He came to me with a business proposal. "You want to invest in property development?" I asked, surprised. "Not just any properties." His eyes gleamed with excitement. "Artisanal food halls, places where small food businesses can share space, resources, cross-pollinate customers. And the anchor tenant in each one, Chris Cakes and Creations." The plan was brilliant. Low risk, high potential return, scalable. Within 3 years, we had locations in 4 cities. Alex's engineering background meant the buildings were marvels of efficiency and sustainability. My food industry connections brought in top-tier vendors. It was during the audit for our 5th location that Alex discovered something unexpected. "Uncle Chris," he said, entering my office with a thick folder. "You need to see this." He spread financial documents across my desk. "I've been tracking Mom's financial movements. She didn't spend all the money she took from you. A large portion was moved to a numbered account in Switzerland, then to the Caymans, then to Singapore. I've found it. I stared at him, dumbfounded. How? He shrugged. Engineering is about understanding systems. Financial systems aren't so different from physical ones. They leave traces. What are you going to do? It's not what I'm going to do. It's what we're going to do. He pointed to the final page. File this motion. The money's yours, Uncle Chris. Always was. The recovery wasn't immediate or complete, but it was substantial. Enough to expand our business empire further, to donate to culinary school scholarships, to feel like some cosmic balance had been restored. One night, after the successful opening of our 10th location, Alex made another surprising request. I want to set up a trust for him. Who? Mark, my father. Alex's expression was complex. He's in a rehabilitation facility in New Mexico. For good this time, they think. I've been in touch with him. I set down my drink carefully. Why would you do that? Because Grandpa would have, he said simply. And because I'm in a position to help, to break the cycle. I thought of Dad, of his quiet strength and capacity for forgiveness. Of the complicated love that holds families together despite betrayal and hurt. You're a better man than I am, I told Alex. He smiled. Mom's smile, I realized with a pang. I had a good example. Not Mark, not Mom. You, Uncle Chris, you could have turned your back on me, but you didn't. You chose family, even when it wasn't easy. 6 months later, Mark attended the opening of our newest location, sober, thinner, aged beyond his years. Our interaction was awkward, limited, but civil. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an open door. A possibility. Alex thrived, expanding our business into an empire that neither Mark nor Lisa could have imagined. He met a kind-hearted architect, fell in love, started a family of his own. His son had my mother's artistic talent, already showing promise with frosting at age 4. Life isn't a fairy tale. Trust, once broken, never fully heals. But families are resilient things, capable of transformation and growth even after devastating betrayal. Like one of Mom's cakes, ingredients that seem incompatible somehow coming together to create something beautiful, flawed, and entirely worth the effort.